Joseph Men, Washington Post. Researchers. China seems to be flooding Twitter with porn tweets mentioning places where people are protesting, overwhelming Twitter's reduced moderation team. Related, Wall Street Journal. Chinese protesters are holding up blank pieces of paper as a protest against censorship, leading platforms and censors to quickly remove the images. The blank pieces of paper thing, I think it was Benedict Evans who I saw tell a story, sort of apocryphal tale about someone during the Soviet Union passing out flyers, and they were approached by the police because the police assumed that the flyers had some form of, political dissent, civil dissent printed on them. And they were blank pieces of paper. And they said, "Why are you handing out blank pieces of paper?" And the person inciting civil unrest said, "Everybody knows what the problem is. Why would I waste the time to write it down?" I think it's good that this is happening in China. I think it's hopeful to see some section of the Chinese populace speak out against the aspects of their state that they don't approve of and that they don't like. And it's exactly the sort of thing that social media tools generally, and I think Twitter in particular, are well suited to support. Twitter especially, because of the sort of inherent asymmetry of the way users connect to one another on Twitter. You're not a friend, so there isn't the same sort of built-in social expectation that if I press the button that says you are a friend of mine, you feel obligated to press the button that says I'm a friend of yours. Whereas in Twitter, you just follow, and the person who you are following doesn't really feel a sense of obligation. On top of that, retweets, hashtags, quote tweets are tools that enable posts to travel very quickly, very easily, in a way that I don't think other tools do. To the best of my knowledge, last time I looked at Instagram, there's no first-party way to reshare a post on Instagram. Maybe there is, I don't know. But the way I think you can tell that Twitter is in fact quite useful in circumstances like these is this top story, which is that some actor is populating Twitter with accounts, content that are unrelated to the topic of civil unrest, but are connected either by geotag or some other piece of metadata to that topic. And so it encourages, action in a way that it would appear the state does not like, does not approve of. This is what these tools are there for. The issue, of course, is most people can get behind the notion of individuals putting content out into the world to stand up against what the peanut gallery, the majority of the developed world can all sort of agree on as bad action on behalf of the state. The problem is those same mechanisms can also be utilized to retaliate against views, actions that are not as universally agreed upon to be undesirable, right? And that's the conflict here. That's the struggle. That's why these tools are important. That's why these tools are as sticky as they are. That's why they remain, in particular in Twitter's case, at the center of most of the narrative around what's happening in technology, if not popular culture writ large. Again, much energy has been spent on what type of a person Elon Musk is and what their actions represent or indicate or demonstrably support, and all of the feelings associated with that. But this core concept has, quite frankly, nothing to do with Elon, except if you believe that the reason that China is flooding the Twitterverse with distracting or destabilizing information is because there's a weaker moderation apparatus operating at Twitter right now as a result of Elon having bought the company. Maybe you can make that claim. I don't think you can make the case that it's causal. I think you can just as easily envision a world where Elon had never bought the company, it's being run by Parag Agrawal, and the protests pop up in Shanghai and Beijing, and you get exactly the same story. You get exactly the same sort of mass scale behavior. I don't think that this is a result of some change in leadership at the business. It is a reflection of the utility of the tool. Whatever argument you want to make about the ability for manipulating that tool as a result of how the business that sits on top of the tool is being operated, that's a different conversation. Reuters, Elon Musk claims, quote unquote, all-time high Twitter signups, averaging 2 million plus per day in the 7 days to November 16, up 66% year over year, and user active minutes of around 8 billion per day, up 30% year over year. This is the leading indicator, perhaps, of the effect of Elon taking control of Twitter. We're going to see more data as time goes on. I also have no doubt that there will be people who attack the veracity of this data, because if your foundational principle is Elon is a dishonest human being, then how could you trust any of the numbers that are put forward by the business that Elon runs? So it may take quite a while for some sense of ground truth to shake out. But the notion that Twitter's usage and engagement and attraction is going up as a result of this change in ownership, change in leadership of the business, I don't think that's a particularly surprising development. He's bought the business and is working on it and making changes to it in public in real time. These data points are not the result of someone inadvertently leaking internal information and Reuters publishing it. They're the result of the guy who owns and runs the company publicly tweeting excerpts from the deck that he's using to present to the entire organization about the state of the business. That is a fundamental shift in the way this business has been run. And I continue to believe it's a good thing. Is there chaos? Yes. Is there damage being incurred by all manner of, interested parties? I'm sure there is. But at a macro level, it would appear Twitter is more relevant and more engaged with in the N number of days since Elon bought the company as opposed to the X number of days before. Vlad Sevov, Bloomberg, source: turmoil at Foxconn's Zhengzhou hub is likely to lower iPhone 14 Pro production by close to 6 million units in 2022, potentially worsening if lockdowns continue. Related: inside Zhengzhou's iPhone City lockdown, where China's zero COVID-19 policy, related propaganda and fears, and Foxconn's missteps led to the worker riots. I don't really feel like there's more to say on this topic than at least I know I've already said. This is not a good look for the shiny, happy, inclusive California business that shows up every September and tells you why the phone you have, despite the fact that it was the most advanced device ever created 12, 24, 36 months ago, is no longer good enough. And I'll give some deference. There are people inside of Apple, I am certain, who would gladly tell you, you don't have to buy a new phone every year. You don't have to buy a new phone every 2 years. All we're doing is illustrating that if you have felt some motivation to replace the phone you have, the phones that we've just put on sale have never been better. And that's a reasonable position to take. But when you consider that one of the prime locations where these devices are manufactured is being described as under conditions of a worker riot because the state where the factory is located is enforcing extreme measures to try and contain a virus. It's an issue with the optics of the iPhone business that I don't think anyone can easily explain away. As an individual, you can make your ethical choice and decide what's more important to you, to have a new phone. But I suppose to the extent that I feel I have any sort of ethical or moral duty, SWAPA, SWAPPA. They're not a sponsor because I don't have any. It's just me in my garage. But SWAPA is an eBay, a Craigslist. It is a website where people buy and sell secondhand smartphones, tablets, watches, laptops, and they have built just enough specific tools for dealing with those devices that you can have a higher than average confidence that you're not being ripped off. It takes a greater than average level of sort of user education to buy a secondhand phone because it's just going to show up on your doorstep, and the process of turning that into your new phone and then, wiping your old phone clean. Like, there aren't that many people who are going to help you with that. Maybe if you buy a secondhand iPhone and take it to the Apple Store will be more than happy to guide you through the process of upgrading. But I wouldn't be surprised if they actually don't do that. So consider not buying a brand new phone and instead buying a phone that has been lightly used and well cared for, because until such time as Apple has enough other manufacturing partners in parts of the world where the workers are not being, abused or held against their will, it's difficult to recommend that people buy brand new phones. New York Times, Yahoo takes a around 25% stake in Taboola and plans to use Taboola's ad tech as part of a 30-year exclusive deal expected to generate $1 billion or more in annual revenue. I can't recall the last time I heard of a 30-year exclusive deal in anything. I mean, I'm not familiar with like the mining industry. Maybe that's an example because you're going to go dig a hole in the ground because you suspect that there are resources of value there. Maybe it takes 10 years to develop that mine to the point where you know whether or not you're going to get any return on investment. But in technology, in advertising technology, they signed a 3-decade deal. My only interpretation here is whatever tech Taboola has is so low level, so sort of just basic, that it's obvious that it will very slowly provide a revenue stream. Again, they expect $1 billion annually from this deal. It's mind-blowing to me. Equally mind-blowing that Yahoo is still a going concern. For those of you as many miles around the sun as me, Yahoo used to be the index of the whole of the web. You used to go to Yahoo and you would just see listings by category of all the known sites, because there was a time when there were so few sites that you didn't really need to search, because if you wanted a website that was related to automotive repair, there were a small enough number of them you could fit them on an 800 by 600 pixel display. That's what Yahoo was when I was a kid. Then they were a search engine. Then they were some sort of holding company for smaller products. I think, Yahoo owned Flickr for a period of time. Instagram before Instagram. Ask your parents. But the notion that they're still alive today is just wild to me, to say nothing of the fact that they apparently are going to be involved enough in ad tech to be $1 billion a year business. So good on them. Gian Volpicelli, Politico. EU lawmakers claim the markets in crypto assets rules expected to be approved in 2023 would prevent an FTX-like crash, but some say the proposals need updates. Related, Bloomberg, Coinbase names 4 executives covering Ireland, Germany, the UK, and EMEA to lead its expansion in Europe. Another example where the European Union continues to be at least more functional in terms of regulating modern technology companies and sectors of the modern economy than the US regulators are. How useful, effective, beneficial to the end user these regulations will be remains to be seen. The other example that springs to mind here is the EU's regulation that it will force the iPhone to adopt USB-C as its charging port. The head of Apple's worldwide marketing, Greg Joswiak, a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, was asked about it on stage by Joanna Stern, Wall Street Journal, and was, sour about the whole thing. And one of the examples that he cited was a place where, if I remember correctly, it was hearing aids, right? The necessity for a mobile phone to interoperate with hearing aids in a reasonable way. And the example that Joswiak cited was the spec that the regulators proposed for how the two should interoperate was not effective. I think Joswiak's quote was, "It didn't work." And so Apple engineered their own solution, which, according to him, works much better. And so while I'm sure the crypto businesses like Coinbase will make some amount of noise about how they would better craft meaningful regulation for their businesses than bureaucrats would, I'd rather see the bureaucrats make some move that forces the industry to respond, and that tension, I think, ultimately pushes the ball forward, makes progress. It's an apples and oranges comparison, but it feels somewhat related to NVIDIA and AMD. The fact that there are 2 major competitors in the space, they can push each other to improve to the ultimate benefit of the market and user. That said, they can also not meaningfully improve. So, I don't know, there's not a hell of a lot to say here. The market in crypto assets rules is it's an interesting name. We'll see sometime in 2023 what it enforces and what that means for businesses that want to encourage people to deal in cryptocurrencies. Jagmeet Singh, TechCrunch. WhatsApp begins rolling out a message yourself feature, letting users send notes, reminders, and shopping lists to themselves. This is a personal productivity technique that I've never really understood. Well, I suppose I could say I understand it. The idea is if your inbox is the primary place where you deal with action items, then you putting things into your inbox in addition to other people might make it easier to deal with those things. The part that never really made a lot of sense to me, use the example here about WhatsApp. If I send myself a note that says, buy bananas at the grocery store, and it shows up in my inbox, I'm not necessarily parsing my inbox when I'm at the grocery store. So I suppose I could search, but at that point, if I'm searching for everything with the string grocery store, at that point, haven't I just taken my messaging inbox and sort of contorted it into a shopping list for a particular moment in time? I don't know. It's always just seemed more straightforward to me to say, like, there's a different piece of software over here that keeps all the things that you're going to need to reference when you're at the grocery store. But that said, some people, I'm sure, will get use out of this. I'm sure some people are stoked. I'm stoked you're stoked. But it's also interesting to acknowledge that it would appear WhatsApp is reaching this stage of software maturity where, in order to maintain growth, or at least maintain stickiness, that edge cases need to be engineered into the product. Benedict Evans, I think, is the person that I first heard make this reference. Maybe it was Steven Sinofsky. Two of them play together enough online that I occasionally get the references mixed up. You can open Excel or Word and look at every section of the menu bar and every command in the menu bar. And as an individual user is just trying to like bang out a one-page document, that level of feature density can appear overwhelming. But as the business owner, you understand that every single one of those features represents, in some cases, millions of users, right? There are huge chunks of the user base of any mature piece of software that are there because of, 20%, 10%, 5% of the total functionality of the tool. And that's this sort of unfortunate natural occurrence of a sufficiently mature tool. I would prefer to have more bespoke tools. Again, like I have a grocery list tool. It does two very useful things. It is straightforward enough for other people in my household to put entries into it, and it keeps all of the recipes for all of the food that I make so that I can quickly say, oh, I'm going to make ramen tonight. I can press one button and all of the ingredients I'm going to need to make ramen are now populated in my grocery list. Like that specific functionality is, to me, so sort of specific that it's unlikely that something like WhatsApp would ultimately adopt it. I prefer, by contrast, for my messaging tools, my tools that are first and foremost used to communicate with other people, to be tuned around the job of communicating with other people. So, but then again, I'm the weirdo that fantasizes about a world where all of my communication happens in one tool as opposed to 6. Eva Corlett, The Guardian. New Zealand says Twitter failed to detect or remove clips from the 2019 Christchurch terror attack until the government alerted the company. This is another heartbreaking example of what to me continues to be the most obvious realization with regard to content moderation, which is it's up to us. The future notion of a common protocol on top of which Twitter can operate, again, very similar to the way that you can go to WordPress.com and pay to have a blog, but the ability for somebody to access that blog depends on the HTTP protocol and not the whims of Automatic as a business. In that world, the role of moderating content is not, strictly speaking, up to Automatic. They can provide and do a floor, which is spam protection and probably some other utilities that aren't strictly related to content moderation, like, say, denial of service attacks. But the point is, if someone posts offensive or toxic material to a blog hosted on WordPress, WordPress.com, in that circumstance, may have some obligation or responsibility to remove that content. But knowing Matt Mullenweg, it wouldn't surprise me if that's not part of their guarantee. Maybe it is. Maybe with a hosted service, they take on additional responsibility. But the reason to use WordPress as an example is the source code. In fact, the entire WordPress CMS is a free and open piece of software. So someone can take that code and install it on a computer the size of a deck of cards and connect it to the internet in some surreptitious way and host toxic content. And there's effectively no one you can go to tell them to take that down. Are there circumstances in the past where we have seen the providers of access to the internet take actions like this? Yes. I would personally contend that that is an extraordinarily dangerous precedent to set, that the providers of the network itself bear some responsibility for moderating content. There's a hazy recollection that comes to mind about the notion of AT&T back in the time when AT&T was responsible for the entire telephony network in the United States, bearing some responsibility for not providing phone service to known members of the Ku Klux Klan. I don't like the idea that that's something that we would ask AT&T to do. But that's a little further afield. To get back to this notion of Twitter and its responsibility to remove video footage of the attack in New Zealand, should we live in a world where Twitter.com, Twitter the business, takes that content down and doesn't host it in their own data centers? Yeah, I think we should. I think that the responsibility resting exclusively on Twitter the business is a bad place to be. And I think that I would rather live in a world where there are a number of organizations, individuals who all work together in order to provide for protecting the average user from horrific, toxic content. I don't think that it's reasonable at the scale that we ask these networks to operate at to also expect them to do all of the work related to keeping the undesirable content from reaching anyone. So I look forward to a future where you can choose as an end user to go to twitter.com and get a more sanitized version of all of the content on the network, or you can use third-party tools to get a less sanitized version of what's on the network, or you can use other third-party tools to proactively sanitize and tune and moderate what aspects of the network you see as an end user. Whitelisting, blacklisting, those are mechanisms that should be able to be developed by sufficiently interested parties without the access or permission that being a part of a particular business facilitates or provides. Charlie Adams, BBC. The UK plans to criminalize self-harm content in the updated online safety bill in line with suicide content after the death of teenager Molly Russell in 2017. This feels highly related to the story about the previous story, the Christchurch attack, and Twitter providing a platform for that content. The notion of toxic content being popular and that might create or does create encouragement to harm oneself or others is an extraordinarily serious thing and is something that any earnest actor on the network should take seriously. I'm repeating myself. And so criminalizing the publication of that content, arguably the right call, right? Creating the circumstances where if you are sharing, propagating, providing access to material that encourages people to harm themselves or others, you should have some responsibility for that. There should be some meaningful repercussions for that. It should not be um, free of consequence to make it easy or make it easier to access information like that, both because of the thesis that accessing that information um, might lead to more harm, and because providing attention is, like it or not, man, it's the currency of the realm these days. Like, we all talk about how gross it can make us feel, but it's not going away anytime soon. Like, it takes a significant and dedicated practice to create a life where the attention of others is not a meaningful driver for one's behavior. And particularly for younger and younger cohorts, I would argue it's it's not a reasonable expectation. We are social creatures. We derive value from the relationships we have with others, and the the metric by which we measure those relationships is the attention we get and give to one another. This is why it's so heartbreaking to have relationships which are now separated by an entire continent, right? I lived on the West Coast for many years, and there's a vanishingly small number of people whom I used to see on a regular basis, but who now I'm able to get 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes of their undivided attention over the course of a week, a month, a year. It's it doesn't feel good. It feels bad. It feels lonely. And I don't think that there's a human being alive that doesn't have some desire to feel not lonely. And sadly, self-harm is, I'm, I'm not a researcher in this area. I'm not an expert in this area in any way. But my suspicion is, in some set of the incidents of self-harm or causing harm to others, part of the motivation is a desire to be seen as a way to combat feeling lonely. So again, good on the legislators in parts of the world beyond the United States for attempting to improve the state of play here. Will Douglas Heaven, MIT Technology Review. A look at OpenAI's Minecraft bot, which has learned to complete complex tasks in Minecraft after being trained on 70,000 hours of video of people playing the game. Here's a story that just like tickles all of the nerd bones in my body. The the idea that a game as sort of free form and um, Rorschach like Minecraft, best explanation I've or description I've ever heard of it is it's it's the video game equivalent of Legos. There is nominally a storyline and sort of a purpose, but the reality is you can just build and do whatever you want. And so the notion that the OpenAI team has built a piece of software to play the game is fascinating. Like, I can't wait to go read this and see how it plays the game and what it does and how it determines what to do. It's also, I think, instructive to consider that the raw material that allowed for this piece of software to be created is the footage that real human beings create in order to share with one another of their experiences playing Minecraft. I don't, there's not a particular point that I want to drive home except the idea that uh, all of the content that we produce and put out onto the network in particular in areas and on platforms where it resides in perpetuity, there are unexpected outcomes from that. And I don't know how to feel about it except to say it it kind of is concerning, because if you imagine sort of any category where large numbers of human beings are producing material that of the same type, if you look at that behavior as the training data for a particular piece of software that might not exist yet, the behaviors that are documented with that content start to take on a very different valence, I guess. Again, I don't really have a particular place I want to put my chips down, so I guess I'll just go watch this video and then maybe have more opinions later. Eliza Gakritsi, CoinDesk, Paris-based Kiln, an Ethereum staking as a service startup, raised a 17 million euro Series A from Consensus and more. Kiln has around $500 million of staked assets under management. My point of view on much of cryptocurrency businesses remains the same. They are extremely speculative and have yet to show themselves to have sort of meaningful utility, with the exception of staking, or I think another term for it is yield farming. The notion that you can take a amount of cryptocurrency, in this case Ethereum, and provide access to it in order for other people to do things, and that you will be benefited for providing that access over time. That, I think, is legitimately interesting and compelling, because what is that if not what every bank for the last 100 years has done, which is hold a pile of assets and then loan it to people who want to use it for some period of time, with the understanding that the bank will be paid back not only all of the principal, but will make some money for providing the service of the loan. And one of the things that cryptocurrency allows for is for anyone to loan usage of their assets. I think that's really cool. Again, it runs into, I think, the sort of wall of utility. What are people going to do with those assets? But that simple concept, I think, is interesting. So, staking as a service, it's not clear to me from that phrasing whether Kiln is providing an extremely user-friendly way for people to provide their ETH as a tool for others to go and deploy, and that what you essentially would do is take your Ethereum holdings, make them available to Kiln customers, and then you would earn money as a result of not using your Ethereum. I think that's interesting, but we'll see.